This week in Beijing, there were also discussions on finance and other action plans. Well, to talk more about this, I'm joined here in the Washington studio now by Abdullahi Boru Halakhe. He is a seasoned Africa security and policy analyst. So you are, Abdullahi, just the man to ask. I was surprised to hear that China is the biggest investor of infrastructure in Africa, beating out even local underwriters. That's extraordinary.
It is, and that is why one of the things that is hardly said is that for a lot of African countries, they have a very young population and they need to grow. In order for them to grow, they need their infrastructure to be developed, bridges, highways, railroad, and all that requires tremendous amount of investment. And if you look across Africa, whether it's hydroelectric power, transcontinental railway, bridges, all of them are being built by Chinese. And for a lot of African countries, what they're looking at is, look, this is a country that a few decades ago was a developing country. We could learn something from them in order for us to be able to make a leap forward in terms of development. So there is a mutual interest there.
And why do you think it is that over the last 10 years or so, Africa has become such a focal point of Chinese investment? Why Africa and not other parts of the world, for example?
It's mutual. For most of African countries, they also have raw material that China needs. So this is a meeting of minds and needs for these two, for African continent and China. So therefore, it is a perfect union, if you will. It's not without its own issues, and a lot of the time the issues are overblown, and a lot of the time those issues are hardly heard from Africans or Chinese. It's the third party that usually makes a lot of noise.
In the last 10 years, I understand that $4.6 billion has been invested in Africa through something called the China Development Bank 2007 Initiative on China and Africa Development, 90 projects, 36 countries. But they talk about a debt trap, don't they? What does that mean?
There are questions about, some of these projects could benefit from being transparent. Some of these projects could be done slightly better and in a different way. And there is an acknowledgement from the Chinese authorities that that is a gap that exists, all right? And so, of the 54 African countries, 16 of them, their debt threshold has, the debt GDP ratio has crossed over the 50% mark. And that pushes you into territories that you do not want. What is hardly said, however, China probably is around, 14% of all the African external debt is owed to China, but 16% is owed to the World Bank. So there are discussions that need to be had, but it's not a straight line where it's an entrapment of African countries by China for its own end. There are good ways of doing this, and it could be done.
And China is, to a certain extent, I think, on a learning curve, isn't it? I mean,
both of them.
Yes, mutually so. Yeah.
So, even for African countries, it's an opportunity to learn. There's a fair degree of technological transfer from China. There's a fair degree for China to learn because this is the first time they're doing this on a large scale.
So, given all your experience in this field, how can an expo like this one that we're talking about help?
It is an opportunity. It is an opportunity, particularly in a fraught global economic and trade setup. It is an opportunity for China to look at African countries as a place where they can trade. It's an opportunity for Africa to learn from China on how you can scale development. It's not just enough to say, oh, one part of the country, one part of Africa is developed, but it needs to be a whole. And that, over the last few years, African countries have signed onto Africa Free Trade Area. And so with China coming in, with relations with the United States and China, which is China's biggest trader, under not in a good place, it is an opportunity for both countries to learn, for African countries and China to learn from each other.
And briefly, if you will, is there a benefit to China if this trade war situation goes on and on and on, and if there is more of a managed economy globally, which many people think is happening in the future?
It's a challenge. To be honest with you, we're seated here in the United States, talking about China doing a lot of good things in Africa. when in the United States, for most part, it's inward looking, it's, build America, America first. So these are two competing visions that really will define how we'll move forward over the last few years. Even if these, challenges between the United States and China are sorted out, I think there will be a fair degree of reset from China as well as the United States, and that has an impact on the global trading and economic environment.
And I don't think many people have picked up on that yet, to be honest with you. Anyway, we have to end it there. Abdullahi, thanks very much. Appreciate it very much. Abdullahi Boru Halakhe.